Okay, so today we will be reviewing and discussing Uzumaki by Junji Ito. This is my first Junji Ito book and one of my first manga. Can I still say that? I'm still really new to this medium. I'm traditionally a traditional book novel reader, but I've recently started getting into manga and falling in love with the format. So naturally, this spooky season, as I've been reading a lot of horror books, specifically a lot of classic horror books, I remembered that at least a year ago, a subscriber sent me this classic horror manga. I knew nothing about it, but I wanted to read some classic horror manga this season, so I grabbed it off of my bookshelf and oh my goodness, was I not disappointed. I'm gonna break this review up into a spoiler-free section and then a spoiler section and then some final thoughts. So if you haven't read the book, you can skip ahead to final thoughts. I'll have some timestamps in the description to make that easy for you. If you have read it, we have a lot to discuss. So spoiler-free discussion first. I went into this manga knowing absolutely nothing about it except for what is on the back description, that it takes place in a small coastal Japanese town, which is one of my favorite settings, or probably my favorite setting for any horror story, is a small, creepy town where something isn't right. So that instantly got me. But then this small town is haunted not by a person, not by an entity, but by a force, or rather a pattern, the spiral. That is everything that I needed to know to be very excited to read this. So Uzumaki is, like I said, it's about a small coastal town in Japan, this small isolated town that from the very first chapter, it kicks off quickly. From the very first chapter, we see that the spiral that is in our everyday life, in patterns, in trees, in clothing, in hair, in the shell of a snail, you see it all over your daily life. This pattern, this swirl, can get inside your mind. It is a force of its own in some way. And at first it's very vague and we don't understand in what capacity this spiral, how sentient it is, or how it is affecting people. All we see is in the first couple chapters, we see people being drawn in by it, becoming very obsessive over it taking over their mental state and then taking over their bodies as well. We get examples of people who embrace that and who become obsessed with it. And then we also see people reject it, but despite their desperate desire to not let the spirals take them too, they can't escape it. Then we go through, in the different chapters, we go through seeing how the spiral is affecting the town in different areas, like how it had the unique way in which it affects people in the hospital, the unique way in which it affects people at the lighthouse or at the public housing. There's so many different areas of this town that the spiral is affecting people in different ways. And for a while there, especially there in the middle of the book, there was a section where it seems like each chapter, for a good chunk of the book, it seems like each chapter is exploring a different area in a very isolated manner. And it started to feel like a series of short stories to me, where the spiral affects people in this really unique way here and really unique way here, and it almost felt disjointed. And the only thing that felt consistent was our protagonist. Our protagonist, Kiri, is in some way connected to each of these stories, whether it be affecting somebody, whether it be that the spiral is affecting somebody that she knows and cares about, or if she just happens upon the scene where the spirals are taking over. Her boyfriend is also a very strong presence in this book. He's one that very quickly accepts that the spiral is taking over the town and is actively trying to prevent that and to protect Kiri. But Kiri is more of a stand-in of what a normal person would react to such a strange thing that's happening, kind of rejecting it or questioning it, not really wanting to accept this mythological force, which is how I think a lot of people would respond in these situations, kind of just rationalizing it away or pretending it isn't there. But she, of course, eventually has to accept it too. But really just following Kiri through this town seemed to be the only consistent thing, and these little short stories in each chapter felt a little bit disjointed to me. I still really enjoyed it because each chapter unraveled a new horror, but then there were some chapters that just really didn't land for me. It felt almost more silly or too over the top. But I will say, I was not disappointed in the end because I was mistaken. I, as I said, went into this knowing absolutely nothing about this book other than the back description. I hadn't looked up any panels for it. I didn't know anything about it. So as I'm reading these little snapshots into town, I'm thinking, okay, this either needs to feel more cohesive or these chapters need to be longer so that we can more deeply explore each of these horrors. But instead, I got something better. By the time we got to a certain point in the novel, I won't, or in the book, in the manga, I won't disclose where, but at a certain point, everything came together and it stopped feeling so much like a series of short stories, and instead I realized that we're just getting snapshots of the different ways in which the spiral is affecting different areas and different people. But then it comes together when the town is in absolute disarray and we're in this very hopeless and desolate situation, and it's taken over truly. And then we kind of see all these little snapshots feel less like disjointed puzzle pieces and more like world building. And now it's relevant. And now I'm starting to see what causes this reaction and why this one reacts a little bit differently. And it flows together in such a satisfying way. I was also so impressed. In the beginning, it almost felt like these little snapshots were just whatever Ito could come up with. But instead, it ended up coming together not only in a satisfying way, but we ended up even exploring some really great themes. I say all this to say, if you decide to read it, if you haven't read it and you decide to read it and it feels a little bit disjointed at the beginning, stick with it because there's purpose, and I, at least, was incredibly satisfied with the way it came together and with how great the ending was. Also, I really, really love, as far as themes go, one thing that I can discuss spoiler-free is that, and it's probably already apparent with what I've said in this review, is that there's a great emphasis on obsession in this book about the spirals getting inside your head, and then not only do you see them everywhere, but they get into your being. And the character's depiction of becoming obsessed with the spiral, I really, really love when horror and obsession are written together, because I have an obsessive personality, which is why I read an obsessive amount, because I try to channel it in a healthy way. But it's something relatable to me. It's something that I know. It's something that I'm very acquainted with. And this focus on obsession and obsession taking over you and destroying you is something that feels familiar to me. And I don't know if everybody could relate to that, but I love that theme, and that's a really strong theme here on people being so obsessed with something that it becomes them. Oh, sorry, one more thing before I get into spoilers. I should probably talk about the artwork because this is a manga. I think that his artwork is absolutely stunning. There are so many gorgeous, gorgeous panels in this book, but then you turn the page and you go straight from gorgeous to horrifying. And that ability to kind of draw you into this disturbing beauty, because even the panel I just showed you, it's gorgeous, but it's also very unsettling. And then you turn the page and then you just get full blown, what is happening here? And I love that. I love his ability to draw you in with this unsettling beauty and then turn the page into just horror. It's wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna do spoilers now, so if you haven't read the book, go ahead and click the description, go to final thoughts, just jump straight there. But for those of you who are interested in spoilers, we have some things to discuss. First, I wanna take you through some of my favorite and least favorite chapters, just kind of mentioning the bits that landed really well for me and the bits that didn't for me. It's not me saying that certain chapters were bad, it's just me saying that, you know, some of them I liked more than others. And then we'll talk about it coming together, the ending, and also some of the themes I'd love to discuss a little bit. As far as chapters that I didn't love, I think the main ones were just the ones that seemed almost a little bit more silly than scary to me. Like, for instance, the hair chapter. And the hair thing, it definitely fits with the themes in that it's, you know, the spiral calls for attention, so they become obsessed with needing attention, and so the spiral does it through their hair. But I don't know. There was nothing disturbing about it. It looked more silly than anything. And then when they had a hair battle, it really seemed silly. Although even the short stories that don't fully work for me because they don't land in any kind of even mildly unsettling way for me, there's still really good moments. Like, I do like that the hair obsessively growing ended up sucking the life out of the person in order to continue the growth. And then we're left with this image of this woman or girl who is essentially a hanging corpse on the telephone pole, and the people aren't even acknowledging the hanging corpse. They're looking up at the spirals. And I really liked that image of them not even seeing the horrors right in front of them because they're so fixated on the thing that's taking the town over. I really liked that. So even the chapters that didn't land just right for me, still there's something to love about them. I really loved the Jack in the Box chapter because, I mean, Jack in the Boxes they're supposed to be creepy. They're constantly, they're used in horror, not infrequently. And this kid who's obsessed with our protagonist and who, to the point of actually getting hit by a car and dying, and then we go then the Jack in the Box, the gift he gave her, is haunting her. And then we go try to, like, stake him because we don't know what we're doing here. And then the guy himself pops up from the grave and starts chasing them in his creepy Jack-in-the-Box way. That's awesome. The snail is another chapter that I didn't super love. It just seemed too weird to me. It didn't seem, I don't know, it didn't seem like something that could seep into my everyday life, because even though I'll see a snail and I'll see the spiral, I'm not worried about that having once been a person or about me turning into a snail. It just seemed too abstract for me. But it ended up tying into the end in a way that made me love that this chapter was here and that this was an element in the story. So again, this is what I'm saying. This chapter didn't really do much for me, but the way it tied in by the end, I was like, I'm so here for these snail people. The lighthouse chapter was really great with it burning people up and you know, people being obsessed with going up the spiral of the staircase and the spirals being in it, and then it burns people when dusk sets. That's so great. I loved the hospital section where her cousin, was it? Yeah, her cousin got bit by a mosquito and then got sick because of it, so she's in the hospital, but now she's infected with this mosquito-like mentality of, in order to feed my baby, I must drink blood. And, you know, that in and of itself is like, oh, okay, whatever. But the fact that they have these tools where they come in to people's rooms while they sleep and drill holes into them so that they can drink their blood to nourish their child is so grotesque. And not only that, but then you also have this kind of this haunting, almost zombie-like demeanor that they have when they're hunting for blood, and it's just wonderful. That bleeding over into the next chapter with the babies, and you know, I don't know, I definitely liked the one with the chapter with the pregnant women more than I liked the chapter with the babies, but it was still I still loved this concept of like these babies growing these mushrooms, and then the doctor harvesting those or placing them somewhere, and then they grow up from where they were, and then they start feeding them to people is just like so disturbing to think about. The doctor naturally deciding to put the child back inside the mother was probably the most disturbing panel in the manga. Anyway, near the end, it felt far less like a series of strange things that are happening around the town, and far more of the culmination of everything that we just set up. So as the town is being taken over by the spiral, by this chaos, by death and madness, it's becoming so desolate. And we get this distinct shift when we switch briefly over to following some reporters that are coming in to report on the story to hopefully provide relief. They end up in a car accident, and we're back to our protagonist. And we see that this town is essentially in ruins, and corpses everywhere, and so much desperation. And this was where the manga really started. I mean, I enjoyed it from the first page all the way through, even though there were some chapters that I was feeling a little bit uncertain about. I enjoyed myself reading the whole thing, but it wasn't until we got to this point that I was like, oh my goodness, I'm reading something truly masterful. The absolute fear and desperation that Junji Ito captured in this book, in this manga, he captured it so wholly and so well. I felt, as I was reading it, I felt so hopeless in this town and so desperate. And he captured that desperation and the many forms that it takes so well, with gangs forming and just causing chaos and further destruction, and almost reveling in the suffering that's happening around them, as well as, you know, people huddled together and trying to find refuge among each other, but at the same time also, you know, bickering amongst each other and fighting and every man for himself, while also still trying to be protecting each other. It was so good. But then the continuity and the purposefulness of it all coming together, with people not wanting to create whirlwinds, so they move slowly, but then the slowness is what ends up taking them over, with them turning into these snail people. But then on top of that, you also have themes being explored really heavily, not only in the different forms in which people respond to these desperate situations, but then also with people knowing that these snail creatures were once human, are still in some capacity human, but telling yourself, no, they're not human, because you're hungry and you need to survive. Your survival mode is on, and so your morality and your beliefs shift. And so you have the people who are causing chaos and reveling in the chaos and thriving in the chaos. You have them who are the first ones to start cooking and eating the snails, and people are horrified by it. Even our protagonist is horrified by it. But then even she eventually breaks down and eats snail too, because what do you do in a survival situation? Do you keep your morals or do you keep your life? And you just continue to see it crumble more and more, with the people starting to grow into each other, but still being obsessed with staying in these houses. So they continue to build them, and they continue to try to keep them. And then whenever somebody dies, they untangle themselves from the corpse and dispose of it and ask them to take it away for them. Or with the snail people, you have people trying to find a way out. We learn that this town that they're trapped, there is no exit. No matter how you try to leave, you will either end up in a terrible accident, or you will simply end up in a circle and back into town. There is no way out. The town will not let you escape, which I love. But then also anybody that tries to come in, all the relief teams that try to come in, that try to help them, they all end up trapped too, and end up being victims to the spiral as well. There is always a way in, but never a way out. The spiral will keep you here. I love it. But then you have people who are still searching for a way out, still trying to find a way out, yet have still lost a piece of their humanity in this survival mode that they're in. So they have a person who's turning into a snail, they have them tethered to a rope, and they're bringing them along on this adventure to try to escape because, hey, they might get hungry at some point. And you just see it getting into their mind more and seeing them lose themselves more and more the more time that they spend with the spiral, to the point that now they're excited to eat the snail people raw. They don't even want to cook them anymore. They revel in the act. Now back to Kiri, because you also have there were times where I was kind of frustrated with Kiri because like her boyfriend is telling her all these things. He quickly accepts that this force is on the town, and naturally the town doesn't accept it as a force. They kind of write it off because that's what you would do in a situation like this. But he's proven himself over and over and over again to be very knowledgeable, to be very insightful, to really understand this. And yet Kiri is regularly just saying, oh, God, you're overreacting, or you're being ridiculous there at the beginning. Eventually she does accept it, and she does, really heed her boyfriend's counsel. I really think that she's a great contrast to him because of her persistence in maintaining hope. So, you have her still trying to escape the town despite knowing that there is no way out. She and Suichi, her boyfriend, are trying to get out together, as well as her little brother, but her brother is turning into a snail, and her still trying to protect him, still trying to carry him, not wanting to leave him for dead, not accepting that he is subhuman, that he's less than human as he's making this change, despite having already eaten snail herself. It's good. But then even her, despite knowing that there's no way out, despite having these people following them, being obsessed with the snail, or with the spiral, wanting to eat her brother, despite the fact that he's fully changed into snail now, her hope really doesn't dissipate, to the point that she shepherds her brother down the mountain and says, just stay well. I'll come back for you. I promise. And it's like, where do you get this hope? Like, this idea that you can come back to him, this idea that you can offer him any kind of resolution, any kind of hope of getting out of here, or somehow turning him back to a full human? How? But it doesn't end there either. When they do end up following the houses, and the housing turns into a spiral itself because they keep building it and connecting it, and then they finally find the end, and it's at the Dragonfly Pond that has been referenced all throughout this book, and that it seems everything horrible is coming from. They finally get there, and they find the spiraling staircase to get to the bottom. So they start walking because she just wants to find her parents. And me, and my cynical self, I'm like, consider them dead. Assume them dead. You can't find them in the town. Everybody in the town is dying. Assume them dead. Don't go into the depths. Don't go into the belly of the beast. What are you doing, you fool? But at the same time, it also still feels so consistent with her character, because she is the embodiment of hope in this desolate situation where people are digressing into these terrible things. She isn't, and I think that's a big part of why the spirals are all around her and affecting her but never taking her over, is because she's not giving into them. She's maintaining this hope all throughout the story, and her hope, I think, is what's protecting her from the spiral. So while her descending into the belly of the beast in order to maybe, hopefully, possibly find her parents is foolish, and I'm at the page saying, consider them dead, leave, go find somewhere else to be. Not that there's anywhere else she can be, but anyway, she goes. And once she gets down there and, finds all the corpses that have essentially turned to stone, finds what is in this beast, and realizes, she and her boyfriend realize, that this thing has been going on for who knows how long, that this town is essentially stuck in a loop where it descends into the spiral. The spiral takes over the town, and takes over the people and destroys it. And then once that is complete, then it kind of almost, I interpret it as it almost hibernates while the town builds itself back up. New people come in and it becomes a town again. And then, however long later, the spiral takes over again, and it just keeps doing it again and again with new victims each time. But it was in realizing this, I think, and seeing her parents dead and knowing that her brother is off somewhere as a snail and knowing that now her boyfriend too can't go on, that she finally lies down and embraces the spiral, and that is when it ends. That is when it says, "So the curse was over the same moment it began, the endless frozen moment I spent in Suichi's arms, and it will be the same moment when it ends again, when the next town is built amidst the ruins of the old one, when the eternal spiral awakens once more." Oh, what an ending. What an ending. It was when she finally gave up. She was the last straw. It was when she finally gave up that it was over, because she was the last one that the spiral hadn't gotten yet. Oh, I loved it. I loved it. Anyway, this has been long, so I'll leave it there. But what a book. Okay, we're in final thoughts now. So if you're spoiler free, hopefully you're still here. You've come back to me. My final thoughts are that this book was extraordinary. This manga was extraordinary. Sorry, I'm still very new to reviewing manga, so if I'm doing a poor job, please forgive me. Maybe I'll get better. I think that this was so great. It was such a mixture of things that will get into your mind. You know, I see spirals everywhere now since I started reading this book, and it's fun for me. I would say I'm not easily scared, so when I see a spiral, I'm like, ha, that's great. It reminds me of Uzumaki. So I see him everywhere, and I'm reminded constantly of these images that I've seen and of this town that is horrifying. I'm reminded of these characters that I think were actually quite well fleshed out and had a lot to them. I loved the genuine horror of this book, but I also loved the continuity that it ended up having, as well as a lot of the things that I feel like we're in there to make us reflect on a little bit more. I definitely recommend this. If you're easily scared, probably no. But if you aren't and you really like feeling very uncomfortable, you should read this because I loved it. And it's also, it's thick. Sorry, there. It's thick, but it's also very fast to read because there's not a ton of text on it. It's very visually led. So it's a super fast read, super uncomfortable read, super addictive read, which I also love because it's so focused on obsession, and yet I really felt like this book, I couldn't stop reading it. I kind of became obsessed with turning the pages, which is just a great added bonus. I really enjoyed it. I also think that if you're relatively new to manga like I am, it is a really good starting point if you like this sort of terrifying, horrible thing. But anyway, I would love to continue discussing it with you in the comments. I've already bought another one of Junji Ito's books, so I will be reading more of him. Go ahead and recommend, if you've read more of his stuff than this, go ahead and recommend what you have enjoyed. If you have read it, if you plan to read it, chat with me about it in the comments. If you're going to discuss spoilers, please do the spoilers space so that we don't spoil people that are here spoiler free. I post videos every Tuesday through Friday. I'll see you again soon. Bye.